for melodic heavy metal. Playing it heavier, louder, raunchier, faster. This is the Signals of Intuition.
There's Uli Jon Roth right there with a re-recording of his classic Scorpions track, The Sails of Sharon, from his new record, The Scorpions Revisited. You're listening to The Signals of Intuition, your home for melodic hard rock and heavy metal. And tonight on the show, we have that guitarist, Mr. Uli Jon Roth, on the line. So let's get him in here right now.
Hello.
Hey, Uli, it's Brandon from The Signals of Intuition. How you doing?
So everything's good.
Good.
Very good.
So I'd like to sort of start at the beginning of you as an artist and then sort of work our way up to, what you've got going on now. Where did you grow up and how did you get involved in music?
I grew up in Germany. We moved to the town of Hanover, and I remember falling in love with music way before I played an instrument. The first thing that really got to me in a big way was the music of the Beatles when I was not even 10 years old. So I started learning all that stuff by heart, and later on I started to learn the trumpet and some instruments, and then I gravitated to guitar. And then that became a big love affair.
How did you start playing guitar? Like, did you start begging your parents to buy you one and then getting formal lessons, or?
No, back then there were no lessons really. There were lessons for classical guitar, but not for electric guitar. Not that I know of. Because the guitar was still evolving in many respects. So back then, all the players that I know of were basically self-taught, meaning you would listen to the albums of other people and learn how to reproduce these sounds, basically copying it.
Mm-hmm. So other than the Beatles, like you mentioned, who were sort of some of your big early influences on the guitar?
Yeah, after I started playing the guitar, first major thing was definitely Eric Clapton, Blues Breakers, and Cream, and then very shortly afterwards I got into Jimi Hendrix music in 1968, 69. So those two were very, very important to me. And then later on, there were all sorts of other players that I looked up to and learned from. People like Johnny Winter, Jan Ackerman from Focus, and I remember also Alvin Lee for some time.
Was Ritchie Blackmore a big influence?
That was later. I was already able to play when I got exposed to his music. So it wasn't like that formative. Listening to his playing gave me a good idea in a couple of respects. He did some interesting things with the whammy bar and the way he phrased some of his solos. So I guess he was, Then I never really sat down and learned his solos note by note, which I had done with regarding Hendrix and Clapton. But with hindsight, I guess he was, at that time. I didn't really follow Deep Purple as such, but I did see them live in 72, and that made an impression.
And then, when you saw them live, was this sort of just when you're getting your start playing in bands? Like, I know the first one that I'm aware of is you playing in Dawn Road.
No, I was already in bands. I started in bands from 1968.
Well, was that just like a couple friends together in school kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Neighborhood friends who could play, who already had a band, then I joined them. That was also the time when I had my first show. That was in 1968. So I'm still a child of the 60s in that respect.
So the first band, I think at least that I'm aware of, is you playing in Dawn Road. How did that band come together?
It was a band of friends from school. I had already been in bands before that, and I had formed a couple of bands before that. So half of Dawn Road were people that already knew each other from the previous band, which was called Blues Company Hanover. And yes, very imaginative title. Then we had a band called Blues Exchange. And in that band, we had Francis Buchholz and Achim Kirchling, the keyboard player. And then very soon afterwards, we teamed up with drummer Jürgen Rosenthal, and that became Dawn Road. Dawn Road was a four-piece. And then eventually Dawn Road merged forces with Rudolf Schenker, the one remaining member of the Scorpions who had just split up. And so we formed the new Scorpions together. 4 members of Dawn Road and Rudolf Schenker, and then Klaus Meine joined us, and then we were 6 initially in the Scorpions in 1974.
Oh, so the Scorpions actually had a keyboard player initially then, eh?
For a short while, yes. Yeah, he also played on the first album, Flight to the Rainbow. Yeah, he was there.
And then any sort of memories playing with the Scorpions in this time period, the early to mid-'70s kind of thing?
Oh, don't ask me that. I've got so many memories. I could write a book about that. I remember that time very well. It was a great time. It was great growing up that way and experiencing life in a very different way, starting to tour up and down the country and then also going abroad for the first time with the music. It was a very exciting time. And also the music was exciting because we started doing new things on every album. And, I've got nothing but good memories.
What were some of your first experiences abroad, like going outside of sort of maybe Germany or even, mainland Europe? Did you guys ever play the States with the Scorpions?
No, that happened in 1978. We stuck to Europe initially, and gradually our influence started to swap across the borders, so to speak. So we first made it to the neighboring country of Holland, a small country next to Germany, then Belgium, then France, then England. And we started touring these countries on a regular basis, and we had quite an impact in every single one of them. So once we started touring England, we sure packed the places very soon afterwards, and we played there a lot. The same in France. And that was very helpful. And then gradually the influence also extended to Japan with our album Virgin Killer becoming our first gold album, and that actually was in Japan.
How was that like, going from sort of these European countries to Japan? Did you find it to be quite a different culture and, obviously a different language and all the rest of it? How were your first experiences there?
Totally different culture. It's as different as it gets. The people think in a different way, they feel in a different way, they behave in a different way, particularly when you're comparing Japan to America. I mean, they're worlds apart. At least that's what I see. Of course, in some respect, they're all people, and deep down inside, they are very much the same. But when it comes to the more cultural aspects, these two couldn't be further apart. And I did experience that. I found it very, very interesting, because I always find traveling interesting to see how different languages and different cultures interact and what the differences actually are between them. Once you develop an eye for it, you can see things, and it puts everything into perspective.
And you guys did quite a number of records with Dieter Dirks. What did he bring to the table as an engineer, and how did he work in the studio?
He brought a lot to the table. He was a very good producer. I think we learned something from him, particularly on the first album, In Trance. He had a very astute working method, and he was such a hard worker. That's one of the things I learned. In the studio, he would fight tooth and nail to make sure that we're getting the best results. And very, very late into the night, long sessions to the point of exhaustion, but sometimes that's a good thing. He had a certain galvanizing force that he brought to the table, and the band was already very self-contained. I mean, we already sounded like that night after night, so it was relatively easy to capture. All you needed to do was put a microphone in front of it, and the rest, we had that sound. It was in us, So I don't think that he really did much regarding the sound, particularly not in the period when I was there. It was more a case of recording it properly. But in terms of producing, I think he did a good job. There were some things that I didn't like for instance, I think we spent way too little time on the guitars. I think they deserve more time.
What do you mean in that regard? Just getting tones, or like pushing you to write a better solo, or, you know?
No. Most of the time was spent on getting the bass and drums right in the beginning. And I thought that was putting the horse before the cart.
Oh, I see.
It should be the easy assignment. I would spend most of the time on the vocals and the guitars, the things that carry the main emotion. But we ran out of time on that album, so I had to do all my guitars in 2 days flat, and I thought that was not good because I could have done much better. So that was the one thing with hindsight that I really didn't like, the budgetary constraint, and in terms of production, I think that was a mistake. But other than that, he was a good producer. And later on, he came more into his own after I left. I think the band developed an even stronger working relationship when they had all the big hits, etc. I think Dieter Dirks was a very important catalyst.
What ultimately prompted you to leave the Scorpions? Like, I know you guys have a strong relationship to this day, but what sort of at the time was the catalyst for you deciding to leave?
It was just musical and artistic considerations. I started writing material that was distinctly not fit for a Scorpions kind of environment. I started to write mini symphonic pieces, like Earthquake, like 10-minute pieces, instrumental, and I really wanted to do that because that's where my mind was at that time. And I knew that this would not be right for the Scorpions. So I felt that I needed to take a different route and have more space for my musical explorations. That was really the reason. It was an artistic reason.
So after that, obviously, you already mentioned bringing forth Electric Sun. How did Electric Sun come together? Was it initially, like a studio project that grew into a band, or did you start with musicians jamming and then having the material slowly develop from that point?
No, it was an idea that I had. I wanted my own band. I found musicians, and that's what it was. And I wrote the music, so it was very much my baby. So it was basically like an experiment that I took very, very seriously. Yeah, that's how that came about. It started as a 3-piece, and then it grew. At the end, we were like 8 people on stage. But in the studio, it was always mainly myself laying down lots of tracks and writing the music, So it was very much kind of a counter to In Trance, like you say, where you didn't have enough time to do the guitars. It was totally different. The Scorpions thing was very much geared to being commercially appealing towards a larger audience. Electric Sun was never designed to be that way. Electric Sun was more a vehicle of free musical exploration for myself. And that's what it was, and that's what it became. With all that made it strong and also with its weaknesses. And
I know you've done quite a bit with Uli Ritken. Is it Ula or Uli, by the way? How do you say his name?
Uli. Well, his name is Ulrich, which is the same name as mine, the full written name in German. Then the abbreviation of that, the nickname is Uli. But his mom always called him Ule, which with an E at the end instead of an I. And that became his name, his nickname.
How did you meet him? And, obviously you've had a long-standing relationship with him over the years.
Oh, well, I knew him since he was a little boy because his brother, Klaus Ritken, who is now his manager, his brother was in my class in high school. We were there together. And so he was, I knew him as Klaus' younger little brother. Later on, he formed a band together with my brother, Zeno, because they were in high school together. So, and they had a band called Angel, or after some time was called, I think, Black Angel. That band shared the same keyboard player that we were talking of, the one who played in the Scorpions for some time, Achim Kirchning. He was the keyboard player for that band, and we shared the same rehearsal room in a school near Hanover. Yeah, it was very much close-knit kind of thing, I mean, we were all from the same area. Even Matthias Jabs was best friends with Uli Ritken for many years, and they were like in high school together. So all the same kind of area there of Hanover.
So it's all kind of the Scorpions, Zeno, Fair Warning, Uli Jon Roth. It's all just this big big family.
So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Zeno, absolutely. Yeah, you have like 4 bands there that were kind of in a way related, with one of them becoming very, very famous. But they all know each other, and they go back a long way.
I do want to ask you about Zeno a bit later, but just kind of while we're still on Electric Sun, how do you feel sort of the band and your material evolve between Earthquake and then later, through to Beyond the Astral Skies?
Well, I think it evolved a lot. Each one of these 3, I did 3 albums with Electric Sun. It was Earthquake, Firewind, and Beyond the Astral Skies. And each one of them is very different from one another. And to me, it was actually quite a journey. I would say, if you're asking me like that now, I haven't really thought about it, but off the cuff, the first one, I think, was very much pure in the sense that I wanted a very, very pure natural sound. I even changed to heavier strings, hardly any distortion on the guitar. I was just interested in creating something very different, I guess. And the songwriting was eclectic. I had a couple of interesting pieces there, I think. One was called Lilac, then a little instrumental called Winter Days, and a big instrumental, Earthquake, which I thought was the most important and most artistically interesting piece.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I love that one.
I could still relate to date. But it was quite experimental, it was certainly not commercial. The second one had much more of a rock edge to it. In some ways, there was a parallel maybe to what some of the stuff that I'd done on Virgin Killer. It also had a couple of interesting pieces, I thought, particularly the closing track, Enola Gay, Hiroshima Today, which is an epic, and which I thought was one of my better efforts at that time. The third album was much bigger, much grander, and had much more scope. And of all these, it's by far my favorite, Beyond the Astral Skies. That was the one that not everybody got, that one of my fans. Most fans tended to gravitate towards Firewind. Earthquake later on. In the beginning, a lot of people were disappointed that I didn't continue in the Virgin Killer vein when the first Electric Sun album came. But then gradually it became a cult album, and now I think it's regarded very highly in certain circles because it was so different. It was really what people didn't expect. It's always dangerous when you're not meeting people's expectations, And I'm guilty of that each time around, because my albums are always different from what people expect, including myself. But to cut a long story short, I think for me, Beyond the Astral Skies really took the whole Electric Sun concept to a much higher level, and I'm still very proud of that album. Not that I think everything on it is done in the best possible way, but there was material on it that I'm very proud of. I mean, there was this song, I'll Be There, which is definitely one of my best guitar leads. And there's a song, I'm a River, which was also quite unusual. And then again, another epic, Layson and Son of Sky at the end, which was very orchestral. To me, that was really the end of that era. I didn't want to take it any further after that, and I took a break from it all, and I started to write more purely symphonic material with orchestras afterwards.
And so the next thing I want to ask you about is something that I've been a fan of ever since I discovered it, was the Sky guitar. I actually got to see it up close at NAMM this year. I've never got to look at one up close, and it's a pretty interesting piece of technology. I know in the early 80s you helped to pioneer this, and how did you initially come up with the concept for the Sky guitar?
Well, it happened because during the Scorpions, and particularly during Electric Sun days, I started to push the envelope of the electric guitar more and more, and one of my main inspirations or aspirations had always been to match the world of the violin playing. And I was kind of envious of the range, the higher registers of the violin, because I tended to run out of frets quite often. So I had the idea to put 2 extra frets onto my Stratocaster, which my guitar builder duly did, and he did it so well that he said, look, I can build you any guitar you like, and that was the absolutely defining moment. I started thinking about something that I hadn't thought about before. How about if I actually design my own guitar after having been a staunch player of the Strat all these years, and I still love that guitar. It's a perfect instrument. But how can I take it to the next level, or what for me is the next level? What would it need? What would it need to be able to do? What should it look like? What's the spirit behind this thing? And this is how the Sky guitar came about. It came about through a necessity of not being able to do what I wanted to do musically, and the Sky guitar made that possible. So it's really a different plateau altogether. Because I can do anything that I can do on the Strat, I can also do on the Sky guitar. But the stuff I can do on the Sky guitar, I cannot do on the Strat or on, in fact, any other living guitar that I know of.
I'd imagine, like that process, especially, in the early 80s when this was all coming to fruition, like I'd imagine that was a lot of trial and error. Did he keep coming back with different prototypes and things?
No, it wasn't a lot of trial and error. We got it right pretty much from the beginning. There were some improvements with each prototype. The first one had frets all the way to the top, and it was very difficult to play up there because the spaces got so small. It was just barely doable.
Could you even basically pick that, or?
Sorry?
Could you even pick that? I'd imagine the frets being, you're basically strumming on a fretboard at that point, right?
Yeah, it was possible. It was like you were dancing on a tightrope. You had to be very precise and, like a tightrope walker. There's a price for everything, hey. And then the second Sky guitar, I had the idea to do the top fretless. That also was interesting. It worked, but it still didn't give me what I wanted. From the third one onwards, we had it down. Then the fourth one was the first 7-string that added yet another dimension to it. It was Mighty Wing, which became quite a famous guitar in its own right. And then afterwards, after the conception of Mighty Wing, which was sometime in the mid or late 80s, from then on I played that guitar for many years, almost exclusively.
And
then
I was going to say, mentioning the 7-string, were you the first one to play a 7-string? I don't even know of a 7-string being...
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. Who?
I was going to say, I didn't know if anyone had even played one before you. I don't really recall a 7-string being a thing.
I thought I was the first one. But I found out later on that a 7-string guitar had already existed somewhere in Russia many, many years beforehand. But so the idea must have been around, but I was certainly the first one in rock guitar, as far as I know.
And how long have you been playing scallop necks for now? Were the first Sky guitars scalloped?
I'm not sure when it started. I think also in the mid-'80s.
Is that, now, your guitar, is it, because I know a lot usually scallop at the 12th fret, is your Sky guitar completely scalloped all the way up?
Everyone is slightly different. Some of them start on the 4th fret, some start on the 6th fret, some are completely scalloped all the way. We've experimented with various different designs in that respect, so they're all different.
And I know, too, one of the things I noticed on the guitar, there's a ton of different knobs and all kinds of stuff. What does all that do? It's like my guitar's got volume and tone.
It's a little spaceship, It's like a Formula One car. You can do an awful lot with this guitar. And I'm using all its aspects on a nightly basis. It does not have too many knobs. In fact, maybe it doesn't have enough knobs yet. I'm using them all. Let's leave it at that, Otherwise, I'll be explaining for hours what they all do. But the gist of it is that with the electronics that are on board, they are very, very sophisticated and they're tailor-made. And they are very novel in terms of what a guitar has to offer. It enables me to control the sonic environment of the stage. the way I want to, because every stage is so different. Like one night you will play in an environment which is very bright, and then you need to kind of counterbalance it. Then the next day it might be dull and stuffy, and then the guitar will have to be set up in a way that kind of equalizes that. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm always just relying on my ears and my instinct with that. It's an ongoing thing. I'm doing that every night in order to get the best possible sound out of the whole equation that's at my disposal there.
And speaking of gear, what's your current live setup like now? Do you have a lot of pedals? You tend to be more bare bones, kind of, maybe a wah-wah into the amp?
I like pedals, but most of the time I will play with just a straight sound. Most of the tone comes from the guitar, going straight into the clean channel of my amp. I usually have a delay pedal that I like to give me a little bit more of an aura, a breathing kind of aura for the tone. The effects pedals as such I use very sparingly, only during certain songs at certain times during the set.
And because we mentioned him before, going back to Zeno, tell me sort of about growing up with him. Did you guys bond over music at an early age? Were you close as siblings?
Semi-close. I've always loved my brother, but because he was my younger brother, I was really, bottom line was he did his thing and I did my thing, So we had separate rooms, and he started learning the guitar also at an early age, but later than I did. And he kind of did his own thing, and I did mine. It wasn't like we didn't sit down with our guitars and kind of compare notes, maybe once or twice, but not really. It wasn't a big deal. I guess I was already too advanced for that on the guitar, and he was a latecomer, so that there was kind of division going on. But he learned very, very quickly because he's such a major talent, and he's also a major talent as a songwriter. And
so how then does Zeno develop his own band? Obviously you were doing Electric Sun, and his band, at least to me, seemed like he just basically took what was Electric Sun and kind of Michael and Ula, added them.
Yeah, he was the one who suggested Ula for Electric Sun, I think, even. Because when I auditioned for drummers in London with Electric Sun, it was my brother who was playing the bass. I asked him to, because I didn't have a bass player, to stand in, sit in, and help me audition him. And the poor guy had blisters on his fingers. He wasn't used to playing bass. So the Zeno thing happened really towards the end of the Electric Sun thing. It started because Electric Sun was very dormant for a lot of the time, but basically me just doing my own thing, writing music, and the rest was, the other guys had lots of time on their hands,
Oh, so sort of whenever Electric Sun wasn't doing anything, Zeno kind of was working with them as well on his stuff. Yeah,
most of the time Electric Sun wasn't doing anything, because that was just me basically songwriting or going off on a tangent, So, yeah, that's when they started. I think it was around 83, 84.
And from what I understand, is this true that he was one of the first artists to sign a record contract for $1 million for his debut album, or it was something like that, right?
Yeah, no, it was £1 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Zeno signed the biggest newcomer record contract of all time, I think, at that time with EMI. It was unbelievable. Because the story was they had written a bunch of really good songs. They made a demo recording in 14 days in Hanover, in the studio. And once that demo recording hit the road, actually my manager took them under his wing, Dave Cork, and he started chopping the demo, and it went through the roof. Every Western record company wanted it, and they fought over it. So I remember it was during the recordings of Beyond the Astral Skies in London. Very often I would be part of these business meetings with the executives, and they were all, Geffen, all the majors, from EMI to Atlantic. It was the hottest commodity, and everybody wanted it, and they started outbidding each other until EMI came up with the Trump offer, and that was not necessarily the best thing for the band. because I think with Geffen they would have had a better chance. The problem then was suddenly there was all this huge amount of money on the table, and the band had no experience whatsoever on just about any level, particularly not what it's like to be a real band. And then the pressure mounted because the record company thought, oh, we've spent all this money, and now we got to get this right. So they put in all these executive producers, and the band really wanted to record in Hanover in the environment that they knew, which was good for them. No, then they had to spend like £1,000 a day in luxurious top-level studios around the world. And it was almost impossible to get to the quality level of the demo because that was done without these pressures and being inhibited, Then the singer started to lose his voice. There was so much pressure on the band that the album became a really forced effort. And suddenly something which had started so easily, almost playfully, became a nightmare. And it took a year. And after that year, the £1 million was spent on trivia and expensive hotels and flights to wherever, and recording the album in many different countries for tax reasons, and it was just ridiculous. But it was kind of the situation, it was too big for anybody. Nobody was able to really handle it. Certainly not EMI, certainly not our manager, certainly not the band. And afterwards, they kind of fizzled out, The album sold reasonably well, but it didn't sell anywhere near the level of expectation because the demo had something that the album didn't have.
I completely agree. That's the thing that I noticed too. I've got the remasters of that album, and you listen to the demos, and it's like there's something, like as much as I love the album itself, there's something with those demos that just had kind of a magic feel, like you say.
It was perfect, Eastern Sun, Don't Tell the Wind. It was perfect for that time, and a lot of American bands started to copy that sound because Geffen and a lot of people played that to other bands, and for some time they did exactly the right thing at the right time, and then kind of their time was already passing them by, and then bands like Guns N' Roses start coming to the forefront with a much grittier, much dirtier sound. So there was a little window when they could have been really big, and they missed that window.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, it's funny, too, because, like a lot of people, even who are fans of yours, have never heard of Zeno. They have no idea, for example, he's got a pretty big fan base over in, Japan.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What's he up to nowadays? Like, does he still do recording? Do you know if we'll ever get a...
He's got some health issues. And the problem is, he's fine now, but the problem is he's not cut out for touring or the music business whatsoever. He's like a hypersensitive soul, like really like a poet. Mm-hmm. I mean, the stuff that I do, like slugging it out on a tour night after night, I mean, he wouldn't last for maybe 3 or 4 days. It's just not like that. And so it's a shame, a huge talent, but this music business is a brutal environment, and you need to have the constitution of an ox and the skin of an elephant to somehow make it through. And you need sensitivity. He's got the sensitivity galore, but he certainly doesn't have the constitution of an ox or a horse. And most of the people who make it in that environment, they have that. They can cope with all these. And he needs lots of sleep, also. He sleeps. I mean, he can sleep till 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the daytime. I could never do that. I wake up like at 8 o'clock ready to go, and he needs lots of sleep. You don't get that on tour.
Do you think you'd ever have him, guest on a upcoming album or anything like that, or is he just kind of done with music now?
I don't really have guests on albums because I love to do integrated things with the colors that I provide most of the time. But I'd love to have him on some show, but I don't know if it's going to happen. We did a show together, a Jimi Hendrix kind of show with Jack Bruce once, so that went very well.
I've seen, there's a great video of that on YouTube.
Oh yeah, he played so well, and he didn't even want to do the show because I asked him, they said, oh no, Then I think Adrian Dranenberg was supposed to play, and he kind of canceled like very last minute. So I did ring my brother. I said, come on, I need you here, and sure enough, he turned up. He played a great lead on "In From the Storm," a Jimmy song. He just did it.
What I've heard too is that he, speaking kind of how sort of fed up he got and all that. I talked to Helge from Fair Warning, and he kind of said that the band in the late '80s was just they basically couldn't please the label anymore. It was just demo after demo and thing after thing, and
that's very true. That was at the time. I mean, they had the same label as Guns N' Roses for some time. They even had the guy who discovered Guns N' Roses. I think Sweetheart was his name, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a different era. Grunge was already on the horizon, and a band as quote-unquote pretty, music-wise and aesthetically always beautiful as Zeno, it was already a little bit past its sell-by date, because the times are changing very fast in this business and with the musical taste, if you're catering for a certain taste. And they did. So it was ephemeral. And then afterwards, there was demo after demo, and they came up with some really cool stuff. I remember one demo with Tommy Hart on vocals, which was brilliant. Surviving the Night, and a lot of really good songs. I really liked that. That was around 1990 or something like that. But yeah, it became difficult, and eventually I think they faltered. And then my brother would turn out the occasional album pretty much by himself. But that was that, I don't know what the future holds. Anything is possible, I'm certainly always there to encourage him.
Yeah. Well, if it means anything, tell him he's got a couple fans in Canada who would kill for some new material.
I will tell him. Yeah, I will tell him about you. Yeah.
So last year you released an album of re-recorded Scorpions classics. And speaking of Helge, he told me a bit of the story about how supposedly you went back to the old Scorpions rehearsal space, or what sort of is the story behind this whole record?
No. We went to the same hall that we used to rehearse in.
Oh, okay.
And that was the place where we recorded it.
And how did this whole revisited album come together? From you finding the musicians and...
Warren DeMartini, the top wrestler, a friend of mine, he suggested at some point that I should do a tour devoted to that material, And at first I was a bit hesitant about that because I'd never thought about an idea like that. And then gradually I warmed to it and did it. And then one thing led to the next. I thought, okay, I don't really have a proper live album, but I've got a multifaceted career. Maybe I should start with one that is just dedicated to the Scorpion stuff. And that's how that came about.
What informs your philosophy?
What informs?
Or what's your sort of philosophical outlook on life? What kind of influences you to sort of be the way that you are, in essence?
Yeah, that's a big question right there. And how long do you want this interview to go on for? That's a huge question, because to me, philosophy is extremely important. I have always been interested in these kind of questions about life. What is life? Why are we here? Is there a purpose to life? What's happening after life? Is there life after death? What is right? What is wrong? Simple questions, but answering them could take a long time. So I've always been like a thinker. I love to think about these things. That's just the setup to this question. Now, what informs my philosophy of life, or forms my philosophy of life? If I try to bring it down to the lowest common denominator is, yes, I feel there is a purpose to life, to every life, and I believe strongly that we are spirits in a human body, and that the spirit outlasts the body, and that in itself is the foundation of my philosophy. I also believe that we have been given a choice, or we are being given a choice on a daily basis to make either wrong or right choices. We come to the question, what's right or wrong? Some people would say there is no right and wrong, and some people would say it depends on your point of view. And I think that's very true. My point of view is that we are part of this universe, and we are all extremely interconnected. We are tiny parts, like grains in the sand, but every person is very important to the whole. People's thoughts and people's emotions are extremely important. The way a person thinks, it is up to us to choose either negative or positive thoughts. That sounds very much like a cliche, but I think that's what it all boils down to. And I have chosen to dwell on positive thoughts. I know that there's always two sides to the coin. There's a negative aspect to every positive aspect. I tend to look more towards the positive aspect while respecting the negative. You have to try and see the whole picture. I always try to understand why something is the way it is. And I think that's the crux of philosophy. You ask the first fundamental question is why, and that makes you think.
Are there any are there any authors or anything that you tend to read a lot, or?
I have not read in many years. I do read books. I love books, but I haven't read philosophy in many years. But when I was young, I certainly studied a lot of Plato, some Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, the Greek philosophers, the great classical Greek philosophers. They gave me a foundation in logical thinking and also in thinking about what's right and what's wrong. I believe there is an answer to every question, and it is very often in our power to find the answer. Not always. And I'm very naturally curious to understand things, why they are the way they are, which is sometimes more interesting to me than how they are. I'm fascinated with the word why. I've even written a song called Why, an Electric Sun. It's the first question of all questions, and it usually leads you towards something. It makes you move.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's one kind of a complete 180 from that. You're known for being a huge fan of Jimi Hendrix. How has he influenced your life, and does he continue to inspire you? Or I guess, how does he continue to inspire you?
Jimi has influenced my life in a profound way. To me, I realized very early on that he was one of the greatest artists of all time. Really transcending guitar playing in a way that I love, because I love playing guitar and I love music, but to me it's all, if I don't see a real higher meaning behind the notes, then it tends to leave me cold. And Jimi is one of these players where every note is like imbued with deep meaning, even if it's like maybe not well played or out of tune. There's always a story behind what he played, and there's always a message in whatever he did. And that's what I found fascinating. And that really, I've tried to make that also my main way of being in terms of artistic expression. A constant search for a deeper meaning and finding a way to express that so that other people can also get some of that. Other than that, Jimi had so many impacts on my life, I can't even begin to say when it ends. And it's still ongoing. I mean, I'm walking the streets and somebody will ask me about that, and then it makes me think again. Sometimes I'm more removed from that scene, but it keeps coming back, and it's always fresh, and there's always a new slant to it. I'm always seeing something new in it. It's certainly far from finished. Recently on the tour bus, we had an evening where our drummer, Richie Monica, who plays with Billy Cox a lot, he played some Hendrix tracks on his computer, and it was just a great evening to hear some of that music again after all this time, because I don't really listen to music a lot. It just brought back memories, and it was just as good as always. It doesn't go away, That's the timeless stamp. That's the kind of music that I like, because that's not true of each and every type of music. Some of it is very passing, ephemeral, like a flash in the pan.
Tell me about your Sky Academy that you run. Is it like a clinic or like a music school, or what's that all about?
No, it's absolutely not a clinic. It's also not a music school. It's more like a school of life. We are talking about the metaphysics of music, the things that I found hidden deep in the center of music that makes it all extra special to me. I've investigated that ever since I was very young, and it's an ongoing kind of love affair. And some of that I'm sharing with those who are interested and ready for it. And with a lot of them, it tends to open a lot of doors. But it doesn't work for everybody. You need a very open mind to get into that stuff. Sometimes we will look at the guitar just from a guitar player's point of perspective, and then it's a little bit like a guitar masterclass kind of thing. But for a lot of it, the guitar is just a conduit. It's more about music and life, because to me, the principles of music, the laws of music, are identical to the laws and principles of life, whether that is in a scientific way or in a spiritual or metaphysical way. One needs to find the right cross connections between these worlds and see how they translate from one sphere to the next. And then it all becomes very clear, and it's just beautiful. So to me, music is all about frequencies, octaves, root notes, and energies, with the root note having the fundamental energy that any center of gravity would have, like the sun, for instance, or a black hole. It works very much in the same way. And then the notes, the 12 notes of the scale, are like planets circling in certain orbits around it. Now, to me, life is like a journey through the octave, starting with one root note and going to the higher octave. Life, birth, and death are identical in many ways, but opposite in other ways. One is the entry, the other is an exit. But is basically, one is the culmination of that journey through the octave. And that octave always works in the same way. It's not something I can explain in a split second or two, but there's a lot of knowledge to be found there once we equate music with life and life with music.
Yeah, that's a very, very different, instead of just sort of here's the guitar and here's things you can do on it, it's like here's, a sort of whole other higher level of thinking about what you're doing on this instrument, Do you think you'll record any more orchestral stuff, like Under a Dark Sky?
Yes, absolutely. That story is far from finished. The next thing I'm going to do is one more album in the rock vein, but the orchestral stuff is following fast behind. And to me, that's the greatest joy. I love working with orchestra.
The rock thing you mentioned, is that going to be, will that be like Scorpions Revisited 2, or will it be something?
No. It's all new music, original music, which we are already rehearsing on this tour, and people who buy a VIP pass, they can actually witness the rehearsals on a daily basis. And on that note, I have to end because I'm now due to be on stage for the on-stage rehearsal of that music. Because we're in Minnesota at the moment, and my time's up.
Oh, it's all good.
So.
Well,
but I thank you for the interview. You've asked some very interesting questions.
Well, Uli, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this interview. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting topics that I had no idea we'd dive into. But other than that, I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for all the inspiration and the performances over the years, and I'm looking forward to catching the show on Monday in Detroit.
At the Token.
Yeah, at the Token.
Very good. I meet you on Monday.
All right. Thanks so much, Uli.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. Bye-bye.